The splintered wood of the door did little to muffle the sounds of her fate being sealed. Ilara sat on the edge of her thin straw mattress, her hands clenched so tightly in the rough fabric of her skirt that her knuckles were bone-white peaks in a barren landscape. Outside, in the main room of their tiny, drafty cottage, Elder Maeve's voice was a whetstone, sharpening the terms of the agreement with a grating finality. Lord Valerius's laugh, a slick, oily sound, followed, and it slid under the door like a venomous snake. She didn't have to see him to picture his smug, fleshy face, his small eyes glittering with the pleasure of acquisition. She was the acquisition. A debt, long-standing and unpayable, passed down from a father she barely remembered. The village council, led by Maeve, had decreed it so. The harvest was poor, the tithes to the capital were due, and Lord Valerius, a minor landowner with a major appetite for cruelty, had offered to clear the village's arrears. His price was her. A wife to warm his bed, a servant to bear his name, an object to display his magnanimity. A cold dread, familiar as her own shadow, settled deep in her belly. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being overlooked, of being the orphan girl who lived on the frayed edges of the village, sustained by scraps of charity and her own stubborn refusal to break. She was a ghost at their feasts, a whisper in their gossip, a problem they had finally found a solution for. And the solution was to sell her. Her gaze drifted around the small room that had been her entire world, the rough-hewn walls, the single cot, the small wooden chest containing her only possessions, a worn dress, a comb missing half its teeth, and a small smooth stone her mother had given her before the sickness took her. It was a pathetic collection, a testament to a life lived in the margins. Yet, it was hers. And they were taking even that. "She'll be ready by week's end," Elder Maeve announced, her voice rising to carry through the wood. "Clean. Presentable. You'll have no complaints, my lord." "Oh, I'm sure I'll find a way to tame her," Valerius purred, and the implication in his tone made Ilara's skin crawl. He saw her not as a person, but as a wild thing to be broken. A prize won through a transaction, not a woman to be courted. The thought of his hands on her, his breath on her skin, was a violation that had already begun. Something inside her, a small hard kernel of defiance that had kept her sane through years of hunger and loneliness, finally cracked. It did not shatter. It split open, and a slow, hot anger began to uncoil within her chest. They could sell her name, they could barter her future, but they could not have her. Not the essential part of her that still remembered starlight and the scent of wild jasmine. She would not be tamed. She would not be broken. She would run. The decision, once made, was like a physical weight lifting from her shoulders. The dread did not vanish, but it was joined by a sharp, electric current of fear and purpose. She stood, her movements silent and practiced from years of trying to be invisible. She pulled the small wooden chest from under her cot. Her hands did not tremble. They were steady, resolute. She changed into her sturdiest pair of worn leather shoes, thin-soled but better than nothing. She layered her spare dress over the one she wore for a little extra warmth against the night's chill. Into a small cloth sack, she tucked the comb, the smooth stone, and the half-loaf of stale bread she had been saving. It wasn't much. It was everything. Outside, the voices faded as the men walked away, their deal concluded. She heard the heavy scrape of the bolt on the main door. Locked in. A prisoner in her own home. The finality of it should have crushed her, but instead, it fueled her resolve. A cage was only a cage if you accepted its bars. Her window was small, barely wide enough for her slender shoulders, and overlooked the dark woods that bordered the village. The woods were her only chance. They were deep and wild, filled with stories of beasts and lost souls, a place children were warned away from. But tonight, the dangers within the forest seemed far less monstrous than the man who believed he now owned her. She waited. She listened to the settling groans of the cottage, the distant bark of a dog, the sigh of the wind through the thatch. She marked the time by the slow crawl of moonlight across the floorboards. 1 hour. 2. The village slept, secure in its transactions and its certainties. It had forgotten about her, the quiet girl in the locked room. That was its mistake. When the moon was high and cold, casting the world in shades of silver and ink, she moved. The window latch was stiff with rust, and it protested with a groan that sounded as loud as a scream in the profound silence. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, but no sound came from the rest of the house. With painstaking slowness, she worked the window open just enough to squeeze through. The air that met her was cold and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine. It was the scent of freedom. She wriggled through the opening, her clothes snagging on a splinter, the rough wood scraping her skin. She didn't feel the pain. She dropped to the soft ground below, landing with a muffled thump. For a moment she crouched in the shadow of her own home, a fugitive from a life she had never chosen. She gave the cottage one last look, a place of meager comfort and immense sorrow. There was nothing there for her. No love, no memories worth keeping. She turned her back on it and slipped into the trees, a ghost leaving her own haunting behind. The forest swallowed her whole. The dense canopy of leaves blotted out the moonlight, plunging her into a disorienting, profound darkness. Branches like skeletal fingers clawed at her face and hair. The ground was a treacherous tapestry of roots and stones, and she stumbled often, catching herself on the rough bark of ancient trees. Her breath came in ragged, panicked gasps, each snap of a twig behind her sounding like the footfall of pursuit. Valerius would send men. The elder would raise the alarm. They would not let their prize escape so easily. She had to keep moving, had to put as much distance as possible between herself and the village before dawn painted the eastern sky and made her visible. She pushed deeper, guided only by instinct and the desperate hope that she was heading away from the only road. After what felt like an eternity, her frantic pace slowed. Her lungs burned and her legs ached with a deep, trembling fatigue. She leaned against the massive trunk of an oak, closing her eyes, trying to force the panic down. The forest was no longer just a place of fear. It was quiet here, a deep, resonant silence that was different from the stifling quiet of her room. The air was cleaner, the world felt larger. It was then that she felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The hum of the insects seemed to quiet. The whisper of the wind in the leaves held its breath. It was the unnerving stillness that precedes a storm, the feeling of being watched by something far older and more powerful than a village lord's hunting party. Her eyes snapped open, scanning the impenetrable darkness around her. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to coalesce. She was not alone. The certainty of it was a cold fist clenching around her heart. It was not the clumsy crashing of Valerius's men. This was a presence, silent and absolute. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a monolithic pine tree not 20 paces from her. He hadn't made a sound. He was simply there, as if he had been carved from the night itself. He was tall, impossibly so, and broad-shouldered, a silhouette of immense power against the faint starlight that filtered through the leaves. He was not a villager. He was not a hunter. He was something else entirely. Fear, sharp and primal, seized her. She took a half step back, her hand flying to the small sack at her waist, as if a comb and a stone could offer any protection. He remained perfectly still, a predator allowing its prey to see it, to understand the futility of flight. As her eyes adjusted, details began to emerge from the gloom. He wore dark, practical leathers, but they were of a quality she had never seen before, supple and perfectly tailored to a physique that spoke of disciplined strength. There was no visible weapon, yet he radiated a danger more potent than any drawn sword. His face was a collection of sharp angles and shadows, dominated by a strong jaw and a stern mouth. But it was his eyes that captured her, that held her pinned in place. Even in the dim light, they seemed to possess their own luminescence, a pale, stormy gray that sliced through the darkness. His gaze was not lecherous like Valerius's, nor was it dismissive like the elders'. It was ancient and heavy and intense. It swept over her, not with judgment, but with a startling, unnerving focus, as if he had been waiting for her, and only her, for a very long time. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life, and the sensation was so foreign it was terrifying. It was a gaze that stripped away the grime and the fear, and looked directly at the defiant spark she had guarded for so long. He took a single, deliberate step forward, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. A strange, inexplicable pull resonated from the center of her chest, a low thrum that echoed the silent power emanating from him. It was a physical sensation, like a thread suddenly pulled taut between them, a hum that vibrated in her very bones. It wasn't frightening. Inexplicably, it felt like recognition, like coming home to a place she had never been. Her heart, which had been hammering with fear, gave a painful, convulsive lurch and began to beat to a new, deeper rhythm. He stopped, as if sensing the profound effect he was having on her. He stood there, a pillar of stillness in the whispering woods, his storm-gray eyes never leaving hers. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and a tension that was more than just fear. It was destiny, coiled and ready to strike. Finally, his voice came, and it was the night-given form. Deep, resonant, and calm, with an undercurrent of iron that suggested it was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. "Where are you going?" The question was simple, direct. It should have been easy to lie, to feign confusion, to play the part of a lost girl. But looking into those eyes, she knew a lie would be an insult. And for some reason, she could not bring herself to insult this man. Thinking him a bounty hunter, perhaps one more skilled and dangerous than any Valerius could afford, she found her defiance was the only truth she had left. She lifted her chin, her own voice barely a whisper but laced with the same stubbornness that had carried her this far. Anywhere but back there. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, crossed his stoic features. It was there and gone in an instant. He took another slow step closer. The pull in her chest intensified, making it difficult to breathe. He was close enough now that she could see the faint silver threads at his temples, the hard line of his mouth. He smelled of pine and cold night air, and something else. Something uniquely his. Power. "They will come for you," he stated. It was not a warning. It was a simple fact. "Let them," she shot back, the words braver than she felt. "I will not be property." A long moment passed. He studied her, his gaze unwavering. She felt like a page in a book he was reading with intense concentration. He seemed to be weighing her, measuring the truth of her words against the trembling of her hands. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice softer this time, but no less commanding. "Ilara." She said it, her own name, and it felt new on her tongue, spoken into this strange, charged space between them. It was not the name of a debt. It was the name of a girl who had fled into the woods at midnight. "Ilara," he repeated, and the way he said it was different. He spoke it not as a label, but as a discovery, a word of profound significance. The thread between them vibrated, a chord struck in the heart of the world. "I am Kaelin." The name meant nothing to her. He was a stranger, a formidable and terrifying presence in the woods, and yet, that inexplicable sense of safety, of rightness, warred with her instinct to flee. He was the most dangerous thing she had ever encountered, and also the only refuge she could see. "They will not have you," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl that sent a shiver down her spine. It was not the predatory tone of Valerius. This was the sound of a mountain declaring it would not be moved. "You're coming with me." The command was absolute. It was a decree from a king, though she did not know it. To her, it was a terrifying, impossible choice. To trust this stranger was madness. To refuse was to be left to the wolves, both animal and human. Why? The word was torn from her, raw with suspicion and desperation. "You don't know me. You don't know what I'm running from." "I know enough," he said, his gray eyes searching her face. "I know you have fire in you, and I know that you are not for them." He took the final step that closed the distance between them. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a physical force, a wall of warmth and strength that shielded her from the cold night. "I will not force you, Elara. The choice is yours. You can keep running. Take your chances in the wild. I will not stop you." He paused, letting the weight of that choice settle on her. The wilderness, starvation, the certainty of being hunted. "Or," he continued, his voice a low murmur that seemed to speak directly to the thread in her chest, "you can come with me, and I swear on my name, no one will ever treat you as property again." In that moment, he offered her more than just safety. He offered her dignity. He saw the very thing she was fighting for and named it as a right she deserved. In his eyes, she was not a debt to be paid or a creature to be tamed. She was a person with a fire inside her, gaze turning inward for a fleeting second, his gaze turning inward for a fleeting second, for something genuine, for a long, long time. Loneliness. She recognized it instantly. It was the same hollow ache she had lived with her entire life. This powerful, terrifying man was lonely. The realization was a staggering blow, dismantling the last of her defenses. Her fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by the undeniable pull, the strange sense of destiny that had taken root in the clearing. She looked from his intense eyes to the dark, unwelcoming forest behind her, and then back. One path led to a familiar struggle for survival. The other led into the unknown, with a man who felt more real than anyone she had ever met. She gave a single, sharp nod. "I'll come with you." The relief that washed over his features was subtle, a slight softening of his stern mouth, a lessening of the tension in his shoulders. But she saw it. It was as if the world had finally righted itself for him. He offered her his hand. His fingers were long and calloused, his palm wide and warm. When she placed her small, trembling hand in his, a jolt, like lightning, shot up her arm. It was not a shock of pain, but of connection, of a circuit finally completed. He curled his fingers around hers, his grip firm and protective. "Good," was all he said. He turned and began to walk, leading her deeper into the woods, away from her past. With his hand in hers, she did not stumble. She felt anchored, secure, as if she could walk through the darkest forest in the world and fear nothing. They walked for hours in a comfortable silence, a silence that was not empty but filled with the low hum of their new connection. As the first hint of dawn began to paragraph. As the first hint of dawn began to bleed through the canopy, they arrived at a hidden clearing. Two massive black horses stood tethered, their coats gleaming even in the pre-dawn gloom. They were war horses, she realized with a jolt, larger and more magnificent than any animal she had ever seen. A small, well-supplied camp was set up nearby, a testament to his preparedness. He had not stumbled upon her by chance. He had been waiting. The thought sent a fresh wave of confusion and fear through her. Who was this man who waited in the dark for a runaway orphan? He released her hand to tend to the horses, and the loss of contact left her feeling suddenly cold and untethered. He worked with an efficient economy of motion, checking straps, offering the beasts water. He moved like a soldier, like a commander. He turned back to her, holding out a water skin and a piece of dried meat. "Eat," he commanded gently. "We have a long ride ahead." She ate, her hunger a dull ache she had long grown accustomed to ignoring. The food was simple but filling, and the water was cool and clean. As she ate, she watched him, trying to piece together the puzzle he presented. He was no mere bounty hunter. He was no nobleman's guard. The authority he wore was not a uniform. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. It was innate. The journey that followed was a blur of motion and changing landscapes. He lifted her onto one of the massive horses as if she weighed nothing, mounting behind her. His body was a solid wall of heat at her back, his arms a protective cage around her as he took the reins. The intimacy of the position should have terrified her, but it felt strangely natural, safe. They rode hard and fast, leaving her old life farther behind with every powerful stride of the great horse. They stopped only when necessary, at quiet inns on the fringes of towns where Kalen's commanding presence ensured they were given the best rooms without question. He never let her out of his sight. He would stand guard outside her door while she washed, and take the cot by the door when they shared a room. A silent, watchful guardian. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He treated her with a profound, almost reverent respect that was utterly alien to her. He made sure she ate first, that she was warm, that she felt safe. Slowly, tentatively, she began to trust him. The fear receded, replaced by a blossoming curiosity and the steady, warm glow of the bond between them. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression of such raw tenderness it stole her breath away. It was the look of a starving man finally sitting down to a feast. Their fragile peace was shattered 2 days later. They had stopped at a larger town, a bustling trade hub, to resupply. They were in the common room of a sprawling inn, Kalen having secured them a table in a secluded corner, when the doors burst open. Lord Valerius strode in, flanked by 2 brutish guards and a triumphant-looking elder Maeve. His face was a mask of fury, his small eyes locking onto Alara with venomous satisfaction. "There she is!" he bellowed, pointing a sausage-like finger at her. The entire common room fell silent, all eyes turning to their table. The runaway property. My property. Alara's blood ran cold. The fragile sense of safety she had built around herself crumbled into dust. She felt the familiar shame and humiliation wash over her, a tide of filth that threatened to drown her. She was exposed, her past dragged into the light for all to see. Valerius swaggered toward them, his arrogance bolstered by his audience. "I don't know who you are, friend," he said, sneering at Kalen, "but you are in possession of something that belongs to me. A debt was paid, a contract was sealed, the girl is mine." Kalen did not move. He sat perfectly still, his body relaxed, but Alara, pressed against his side, could feel the sudden lethal tension coiling in his muscles. His face was calm, but his gray eyes had turned to chips of ice. Elder Maeve stepped forward, her expression pinched and self-righteous. She saw Kalen's fine clothes, his powerful build, and assumed him to be a wealthy mercenary or a minor lord who had been taken in by Alara's wiles. She sought to undermine Alara completely, to reveal her utter worthlessness to this powerful stranger. "Do not be fooled by her, sir," the elder said, her voice dripping with false piety. "She is nothing. An orphan from a disgraced line, her family name synonymous with debt and failure. She is worthless, a burden the village has graciously carried for years. Her debt is her only value. She is nothing but a bargaining chip, and you have stolen her." The words were knives, each one twisting into Alara's deepest insecurities. Worthless, a burden, a bargaining chip. It was everything she had ever feared she was, proclaimed for the world to hear. The shame was a physical blow, and she flinched, curling into herself, wishing the ground would open up and swallow her. All the newfound dignity Kalen had given her felt like a lie, a costume stripped away to reveal the ragged orphan beneath. Valerius, emboldened by Kalen's silence, reached out to grab her arm. Come, you little stray, your games are over. Before his fingers could touch her, Kalen moved. It was not a fast movement, but it was absolute. He raised his hand, not to strike, but simply placing it in the air between Valerius and Alara. His other arm tightened around her, pulling her securely against his side, a protective barrier of solid muscle and unyielding will. He rose to his feet, and his full height seemed to suck the very air from the room. He towered over Valerius, his shadow falling over the smaller man like a death sentence. The calm authority he had carried before now blazed into a cold, controlled fury that was terrifying to behold. The atmosphere in the inn crackled, thick with a power that had every patron shrinking back in their seats. "You will not touch her," Kalen said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through the room like a razor's edge. It was the voice of a man who had never had to raise it, for his softest word was law. Valerius, too arrogant to recognize the danger, scoffed. "And who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? She is mine by law." Kalen's gaze was utterly chilling. He slowly held up his left hand, turning it slightly. On his finger was a heavy gold ring, embossed with a seal Alara had not recognized before. The signet of the Alpha King. A collective gasp swept through the room. A grizzled man in the corner, a former soldier, dropped his mug with a clatter and fell to one knee. Others followed suit, their faces paling with shock and terror. In seconds, the entire common room was kneeling, their heads bowed. Valerius stared at the ring, his face draining of all color. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Elder Maeve looked as though she had been turned to stone, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. They had not just accosted a wealthy stranger, they had challenged the king. The Alpha King Kalen, the Wolf of the North, a ruler whose name was spoken in equal parts fear and reverence across the entire continent. Kalen's icy gaze shifted from the ring to Valerius. "Her debt?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. He reached into a pouch at his belt and tossed a single heavy gold coin onto the table. It spun, flashing in the lamplight, before settling. It was more money than Valerius would see in 10 lifetimes. "Consider it paid." He then looked down at Alara. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by that same breathtaking tenderness she had seen before. His expression was a shield, protecting her from the judgment of the world. "Your past is ash," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "It means nothing to me. Your family, your village, their debts, they are nothing." He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch a brand of possession and promise. "You are what matters." The words were the purest form of validation, a healing balm on a lifetime of wounds. Tears she had refused to shed in the face of cruelty now welled in her eyes, tears of gratitude and overwhelming relief. He saw her. He saw past the debt, past the orphan, past the runaway, and saw only her. His attention returned to the two terrified figures before him. His voice was ice and iron once more. "As for you, Valerius," he said, his tone flat and final, "you will never hold title or land in my kingdom again. Your name is struck from the rolls. Be grateful I allow you to keep the pathetic life you value so much. Now get out of my sight." Valerius, trembling like a leaf, scrambled backward and fled the inn without a single backward glance. Kalen's gaze then fell upon Elder Maeve, who was prostrate on the floor, weeping. "Your village's charter is now under royal review," he stated calmly. "I suggest you return home and teach your people the difference between law and justice, for I will be sending my magistrates to ensure the lesson is learned." With a final dismissive glance, he turned his back on them, his dismissal absolute. The confrontation was over. He had vanquished her demons with a few quiet words and the sheer force of his will. He cupped Alara's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Was a brand on her soul. A public seal on was a brand on her soul. A public seal on the invisible bond that had drawn them together in the dark woods. It tasted of protection, of fury, of a love so profound it shook the foundations of her world. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers, his stormy eyes blazing into hers. "You are mine now," he breathed, the words a sacred vow. And for the first time in her life, the idea of belonging to someone did not feel like a cage. It felt like a shield. It felt like home. 3 months later, Alara woke to the soft morning light streaming through the towering arched windows of the royal bedchamber. The linens were silk, the air was scented with lavender, and the man beside her was still sleeping, his powerful form relaxed in a way she knew he only was with her. King Kaelin, her Kaelin. Trace the line of his jaw with a gentle finger. A simple act of intimacy that still filled her with a sense of wonder. The orphan girl from a forgotten village was now the beloved of the Alpha King. It felt like a fairy tale, but the steady beat of his heart against her hand was real. Their life together was not a fairy tale of idleness, however. Kaelin had seen the fire in her, and he had not sought to extinguish it. He fanned it into a brilliant flame. Her past, once a source of shame, had become her greatest strength. With his full support and the limitless resources of the crown, she had established the Hearthstone Foundation, a royal initiative dedicated to relieving generational debt and providing aid to orphans and struggling families across the kingdom. Her days were filled with purpose. She met with ministers, reviewed petitions, and traveled to the very villages that had once scorned people like her, bringing not just charity, but justice. She was no longer a bargaining chip. She was a queen in her own right, her counsel valued, her compassion a force that was reshaping the kingdom from the inside out. She had found her voice, and it was a voice that spoke for the voiceless. Kaelin's eyes fluttered open, his storm-gray gaze finding her instantly. A slow, warm smile spread across his lips, a sight reserved for her, alone. "Good morning, my heart," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He pulled her down for a soft, lingering kiss. "What grand plans does my queen have to change the world today?" he asked, his tone light with affection but underscored with genuine respect for her work. "Today," she said, snuggling against the warmth of his chest, "I am meeting with the trade guilds about sponsoring apprenticeships for the older children from the capital orphanage, and then I have a report to finalize on the land reforms for the southern farmlands." He listened, his expression proud. "Ambitious," he noted, "and necessary." He fell silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. He then grew serious, his gaze searching hers. "Are you happy, Alara?" The question was simple, but it held the weight of his deepest concern. He had given her everything, a title, wealth, power, but he knew that those were not the things that truly mattered. She thought of the cold, hungry nights, the sting of insults, the terror in the woods. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who thought survival was the only goal. That girl was a distant memory, a ghost she had finally laid to rest. She leaned in and kissed him, a kiss filled with all the love and gratitude in her heart. "Kaelin," she said softly, looking directly into the eyes that had seen her when no one else had. "My life began the night I fled into the forest. You were waiting for me beyond the trees." A profound contentment settled over his features, a peace she knew he had searched for as long as she had. He pulled her tighter against him, his hold a perfect circle of safety and love. "And so," he whispered against her hair, his voice a rumbling vow, "did mine."